Well, buenos dias, de novo. Now here we are with Dr. Jonathan. It never stops getting weird to being at somebody else's studio and acting as the host. It's really, really weird. It's like I'm here as the guest, yet I'm here hosting. But,
No worries.
well, Jonathan is the scientific director here. You may recall your exact title better than me. Well,
Yep. That pretty much is the same. I'm the chief scientific officer for the laboratory and also for the clinic. Yeah.
and what's your exact role here? How are you involved in the company?
Okay, so as the chief scientific officer, I'm responsible of all the scientific development in terms of the understanding the mechanism of action of our products, developing novel biopharmaceuticals, or bring new technologies to the laboratory, manufacturing, and also R&D that it will be then transferred to our protocols in the clinic. Also, well, I'm in charge of hiring, training, growing the department of manufacturing, biopharmaceuticals, R&D, and quality for the laboratory. Moreover, I'm also involved in the development and validation of the protocols, or all protocols that we use in the clinic, based on my experience. And that's pretty much the summary of my role here.
And how does someone get into stem cell research and application? How did you get into this world?
Okay, so I started 16 years ago. So my bachelor degree is in biotechnology. I got it here at Panama, and I was involved. Well, first I went to Brazil to University of Rio de Janeiro for a master in immunology, and during my master, I discovered my passion for bone marrow derived stem cells, for mesenchymal stem cells from the bone marrow, since I was differentiating bone marrow to dendritic cells because I was working in vaccines. And then I decided to do more stem cell work. Then I came back to Panama, and then in Panama I worked at Medistem Stem Cell Institute. In the meantime, I applied for a scholarship to go to the United States and do a doctoral degree. So I moved to the United States after working for a stem cell company. That was my beginning in the stem cell industry world. And I went to Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I did my master and my PhD in human physiology and regenerative biology. So then after that, postdocs, I did 2 postdocs, one in Wisconsin and the other one at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Same topic, but it was more related to understanding mechanism of action of different familial diseases that affect ion channels in heart cells, so in the heart, and also some cardiomyopathies, so structural diseases. So I was using a stem cell model as the way of understanding the mechanism. Then I went back to industry. I joined back the company that I left in Panama, but then they opened in Dallas, Texas. So I started a company with the owner of Stem Cell Institute, but in Dallas, Texas, with a team of people, and grew the company. And then I decided to become independent, and then now I'm here at Regeneration Clinic of Panama, and then it's been a great experience. It's my passion, it's my life, and I'm always very interested not only to develop new products and therapies, but also understanding what's the mechanism in physiologically and molecularly, how it creates homeostasis. So that's how I got into stem cells.
Well, there are 2 things I consider very interesting about what you just said. Mm-hmm. The first one, and I already knew it because we talked before, is the fact you went to Brazil. Uh-huh. And I don't usually switch languages mid-video, but just to show, Jonathan consegue falar português fluentemente.
Claro que eu posso falar. fluentemente.
Poderíamos fazer a entrevista em português se fosse o caso.
Também eu posso. Eu posso também.
Which years were you in Brazil for?
Oh, I was there on 2009.
Oh, okay.
Beginning on 2009, yeah.
That was before I went to medical school, because I went to medical school in Rio de Janeiro. So perhaps I had been there at the same time as you.
Yeah.
And the second one is that you mentioned that you went to the United States and then worked at a company there and then came here. And it's interesting that you really focus in on stem cells. Is that really like kind of a very specialized set of skills? Is it common for the same professionals to work in different companies of stem cells, for example, to go from one company to the other inside the stem cell topic rather than just moving, for example, from the stem cell to the pharmaceutical industry and then to medical projects, etc.?
Well, it all depends on the professional goal. To me, it was not only to understand how to get the stem cells to grow and expand, so all the manufacturing cycle, but most importantly, it was to understand how it works. Because I always have so many questions about the dose. Why you're using 60 million cells instead of 120? What's the dose per kilogram? Do you do it per kilogram, or do you just randomly take that number? What's the effect? If there is a titration, what's the pharmacokinetics, the pharmacodynamics? Those are things that I asked all the time and didn't have an answer. So that was one. And the second was regulatory-wise in a country, how this treatment is accepted. How is from developing all the way to the trial. What is good, what is not good. And that was my drive. That's why in industry, I was in charge on presenting investigation and new drugs to the FDA. So our products go through a regulatory pathway in the FDA. And let me tell you, it's very interesting, but it makes sense, but also it delays the bench side to the bedside. That gap, it's 8 to 10 years. And I've seen conditions that need to be treated as soon as possible. We're talking about Duchenne muscular dystrophy, for example, or ALS. Those are diseases that it just 5 years and the patient is gone. So I think if we know that it's safe, we need to push for that. We need to also advocate that the treatment is safe, that cellular therapies, as long as is as minimally manipulated as possible, is something that can be used. It's something that the whole industry took me to that path, and it's how I learned that.
Yes, we were talking about that, Dr. Javier and I, about the delicate balance that is how much evidence do you demand before you accept a treatment? Because it's like the old question about sensibility and specificity, area under the curve. It's all the same thing. Where do you cut? Where do you draw the line? Because if you accept pretty much all treatments with no restrictions, you are going to do harm. You are going to accept harmful treatments.
Yes.
Meanwhile, if you are extremely restrictive, you are going to deny patients treatments that could have helped them. And it seems that so far in the world, the answer most people have come to is that it's clinical trials. The way I generally see it personally, and I'm not like a policymaker, this is kind of my decision, my personal opinion, if there is no better alternative to the patient, I'm willing to tolerate more risk. If the only available treatment has not gone through clinical trials, is kind of unproven, so to speak, then I'm willing to tolerate more risk. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, actually, I base most of the protocols on existing clinical trials and data. But also, to me, number one is safety. I'm not going to accept a product that hasn't been shown at least a phase 1. Or in my hands, I haven't done quality testing that is required to show that the donor of the stem cell or where the stem cell come from is completely clean. There's no infectious diseases. Second, that the stem cell, the manufacturing process in the whole in the whole line, there is no contamination, no microbial or anything that will be transferred to the patient during the preparation of the stem cells, because this is another thing. One is banking the stem cells, and the other one is preparing the stem cells for the treatment. That also there is an open window that of contamination that needs to be covered prior to infusing the cells to the patient. I need to be completely clear with that. In everyone, it needs to be a testing. That's number one. Now, the stem cell per se is understanding the physiology of the stem cell. And if the stem cell will not derive a condition, for example, using induced pluripotent stem cells, just an example, it is a stem cell that it's autologous, but it's genetically not modified, but genetically induced to become pluripotent, and then to differentiate the pluripotent stem cells into a tissue-specific cell, it's another step that is more than minimally manipulated. And then to verify that the stem cell or the final tissue-derived cell is physiologically adult, that it will behave physiologically like an adult cell that can be transferred to the body and will not revert into a cancer. So those are things that I'm very particular, because it sounds very interesting, it sounds very exciting. People get very attracted to that. Like, for example, new cells. New cells are very new, and they say that pluripotent like stem cell. But it's to understand how is the physiology, how is the biopropagation of these cells, and how will be the effect of the cell in the body. And it's more than just an animal model, because the animals are not the same as human. The physiology is very different. Molecularly, electrophysiologically, they're very different. So it is to understand more novel products before going straight to the patient. That's one thing that I'm very, very strict with. But having data, existing data, reliable data, and understanding what's the data scientifically and clinically, then that will open doors to be less discreet using this kind of products. And the dose is something that I work with dosing for many years, and I know cellularly how is the dose, also based on the trials. So we need to be very well informed. We can't be just picking low-hanging fruits and let's do it. It's gonna be fine. It's actually very common, people being like that. No, I did that secretome before, or those exosomes. Just infuse them, 20 billion. It's gonna be fine. And then you see a rush, and then you see someone passing out because there is an immune condition in the patient that you didn't know that is reacting with the treatment. So it's also understanding the clinical history and the profile of your patient.
You mentioned dosing and wanting to understand doses, and you also mentioned like phase 1 clinical trials. Do you do like any basic research here? For example, how do you determine the number of cells? Is that a protocol that you saw somewhere, or is that something you determine yourself?
Yep. So most of the clinical trials, and you can even reference Mesoblast. Mesoblast is a company in the United States that they are the first one that have approved a drug, a cellular drug that is a mesenchymal stem cells for the treatment of osteoarthritis of the knee. And they did a phase 1, and was showing the different dosing and seeing effect in the patient in terms of secondary effects. And based on that, I do it. Also, I compare to other trials, phase 1, depending on the way of administration. For example, in IV, it's known that the range of dose of stem cells is from 1.5 to 2 million of cells per kilogram. And then that's what you do in average. And it's a lot of stem cells. It's a lot. And to me, it's also important to have an effect rather than saving cells just because of manufacturing costs and revenue. To me, it's more important to actually do something to the patient. And I mean, we're the only ones, actually, we're the only ones in the region that is doing that kind of dosing. And in different wave of administration. So yes, there is a know-how prior to decide the dosing. And in vitro, we also do in vitro potency models that we titrate the number of stem cells and understand what's the effect of the stem cell in an environment that simulates a condition. For example, we simulate on the dish inflammation, and then we put the stem cells right from the cryo, like we're going the same as we do with the patient, and we study what's the effect of mixing the stem cells with the situation of inflammation. Let's say macrophages, activated macrophages that are releasing TNF alpha, and we want to understand what happened if we put into the environment stem cells, mesenchymal stem cells, and how they decrease the production of TNF alpha. So that's a model. And then you titrate and you see, for example, what's the IC50 of your stem cell in different titration, and you compare that lot with other lots. I need to be a threshold in which it tells you if it's over, you're fine. If it's lower, the inhibition of the inflammation, then that lot is not as potent as this lot, and you pass or not. So that's also to understand the drug and to keep a drug that is not as variable, understanding that. So you give those tools to the doctor and say, okay, this certificate of analysis, it shows that it decreases inflammation 98%, 95%, 96%, and the threshold, it's 90. So everything below 90 is not acceptable. So the doctor will know that it's a drug that is potent. So it will not be too depending on the biopharma. It's more depending on the clinical case that you're treating. Yeah.
You are talking a lot about how to manufacture the. I'm not sure what call it drugs to manufacture the cells.
Yeah, it is a drug. Yeah, it is a drug.
To manufacture the biological drugs. But one of the things that Jacobo showed me and that drew my attention is that you have a laboratory here inside the building, in a commercial building, in the
Correct.
fourth floor.
Correct.
To me, that sounds like exquisite. It's weird because you would expect to be like a standalone building or something. However, you've mentioned a lot about like the quality assurance of producing the cells. And Jacobo also mentioned that you do intend to expand into somewhere else. But that begs the question, how would be like the distribution network of that? Can you produce it like in a laboratory here in Panama? Let's say we're going to expand. You are going to expand into Colón. So can you produce the cells here in Ciudad de Panama and send them to Colón?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you transport like any drug?
You can send it to Dominican Republic. You can send it to Mexico. You can send it to Colombia. It's more understanding what are the conditions that the stem cell needs to be in order to be shipped. That's one. So it will not affect the viability of the cells during cryopreservation. Second, when they receive the stem cell, how is the handling of that? And that's the part that it's interesting because it's to develop apply a device system that is it's an enclosed system that the doctor will not need a laboratory to thaw the cells and apply the cells. And that we do it. We have a system, a bag system, that is actually used in clinical trials. That's actually how all the companies do in the United States. They do clinical trials. They manufacture in one building, and then they send the stem cells cryopreserved to the clinical trial centers. And they have a protocol, and they teach physicians how to thaw the cells, how to mix it with infusion solution, and then infuse to the patient. Of course, everything needs to be validated to show that the cells are viable, that the solutions that are going to be infused and the vehicles are completely safe, and also all the reagents needs to be tested and approved by the FDA or have a drug master file in the FDA. All that, we can do it. Yeah, it's not a problem.
Because if you're going, for example, to buy, I don't know, insulin, insulin is not going to be manufactured locally on your city.
Correct.
It's going to be manufactured at a laboratory and distributed. So I guess that if stem cell treatment ever becomes mainstream, for example, and starts being widely used in hospitals, it will probably get shipped kind of like a commodity,
Of
kind
course.
of like
Yeah.
like most drugs are nowadays.
Exactly. The packaging is important. So you need to also think that your job is not only manufacture, pack, and send. Is to assure that the product is well handled, it is used as the label says, and that is not going to be any risk of contamination. So at that level needs to be covered. Why? Because okay, I will manufacture the stem cells, it's gonna be in a vial. Okay, take it, do whatever you need, and good luck. Why? Because if something happened to a patient, then it's gonna come back to us. I don't want anything to happen to the patient either, to be in the risk, to be pointed as someone that manufacture a drug that harm someone. So all those steps needs to be covered in order to sell stem cells or ship stem cells overseas or out of the laboratory in the same country.
You mentioned shipping overseas, which is something I didn't mention myself. Would it be feasible from a regulatory standpoint? You mentioned regulation as well. I've already asked Dr. Javier why not do it, for example, in the United States, and he said that the FDA regards it as
Correct.
kind of pharmaceutical, so there's all that. And I also asked, like, well, are you from Panama? And he said, yes, I'm from Panama. I said, well, then I'm not going to ask you why you started in Panama and not, no, in Costa Rica. It's because you are from Panama, of course. The only advantage I could see, and I told him this, is perhaps move to a prime location for this, to a place that has a very favorable regulatory environment.
Right.
Like, for example, the free city of Próspera in Honduras. It's an example I like to give because there are very few micro cities and jurisdictions that operate in entirely different world than most countries. So, but would it be feasible to send it to other countries? Let's say, for example, nowadays, if we're going to expand to other countries, I'm from Brazil, could you just open a clinic there? Is that even legal? Is it considered a reasonable practice in
Okay.
other countries?
One is Anvisa, and Anvisa is the regulatory.
Yes, in Brazil.
Anvisa, they will don't use that. They're gonna cause you cancer. All the doctors will say that and nothing. So it's to understand with Anvisa what's the regulatory environment or the ruling of stem cell, which right now in Brazil is not accepted yet. It's still showing trials, showing safety, and I mean that's the case in Brazil. Mexico, they do have a regulation on stem cells, and they have also some parameters that needs to be covered in order to receive stem cells from another country, which is safety, all the testing, safety testing, sterility testing, and even they require to have some potency and characterization tests in their certificate of analysis. So that's in Mexico. Colombia is very similar. It's not as tight. So it depends on on countries. Of course, United States, there is this big wall with FDA, and that's why we have patients from the United States here because they need this treatment. And sadly, in the United States, it's too expensive in the states that are open without having regulations, without being regulated by the FDA. So basically, the FDA say, okay, something happened to your patient, it's on you. No way of any lawsuit or anything. It just, you're done. And they're too expensive because manufacturing in the United States under GMP, because even these states require GMP, recall the cells that be on a trial, clinical studies, all these things. One, to obtain the stem cells, it's more expensive, which means the treatment will be more expensive, and the amount of cells that are going to be used is going to be less compared to the stem cells that we are going to infuse here. So that's the thing with the United States. But yeah, it depends on every country. Not on us, it's the country.
You mentioned obtaining the stem cells. How do you source them? Where does it come from?
Okay, so of course we mainly use mesenchymal stem cells from umbilical cord, from the Wharton jelly. So let's say the meat of the umbilical cord, and we do follow American Association of Tissue Bank rules for patient eligibility, and also to select the umbilical cord. There's some physical parameters that are by observation. We know that it's a healthy cord or not. So, I mean, we basically do all that testing, observation, and then we pick the umbilical cord. We also have a secondary testing that is genetic, and it's not to know the genetic of the donor. It's more to understand the genetics of the stem cell, that it will make the stem cell more potent. Let's put it that way. This is more IP of the company. We do a genetic testing, and also we evaluate growth conditions. We evaluate the characterization of characteristic of the stem cells molecularly, and that's how we pick the stem cell. But primarily, the main thing, if don't pass, it will be safety. If there is an infectious disease, even though the umbilical cord is the best, it will be discarded.
Yes, infectious diseases are like no goes for any kind of transplant whatsoever.
No, exactly.
But do you like get the umbilical cords from hospitals? How does that part work?
Yeah. So in Panama, we do work with gynecologists, and we train them. We train them how to explain to the donors about why to donate, and also they do fill out an eligibility questionnaire. They release the umbilical cord. So, and then the doctor do the collection. We give them a tissue collection kit. They take blood samples from the mother, urine, also have all the questionnaires, all the forms and the agreements, and then the doctors are the one that provide that to us. Of course, they for their services of collection, they get rewarded. That's how we do it here. In the United States, there are tissue acquisition companies that are certified by the American Association of Tissue Bank, and they need to have the certification code, because if you want to use that tissue for an investigation on a new drug, the FDA will ask you for that. And you also need to do a testing when you receive the umbilical cord on top of the testing that the tissue company do for secure the infectious disease, free of infectious disease of the tissue. That's umbilical cord. That's for any other organ that is donated and taken from the company.
Is most of research regarding stem cells nowadays happening in the United States? Do you have like anything coming from China, from India, from
research?
Yes. Like
China.
Where's the next major breakthrough likely to come from?
So publication-wise, we saw a lot Singapore, China, United States. Also, there's a lot of research ongoing in Brazil, in the USP. Also, Japan. Japan is top in iPSL research. Mesenchymal stem cells from umbilical cord and bone marrow, it's more United States. Yeah. So that's the distribution. Panama, we apply the knowledge that we obtain from United States, and that's what we use here.
What do you think we are still missing to get like guideline recommendations for stem cell treatments outside of the stem cell environment? What I mean, Speaking, for example, about musculoskeletal disorders, how long do you think it will be, and what do you still need before, like, the American Orthopedic Society is going to put, like, somewhere in their guideline that if you have degenerative joint disease with these criteria, you should use mesenchymal stem cells?
I think it's also a question for physicians, because if there is the data out there, if they can gather information from us, from the scientists, you will know more about the in vitro, how it works, which is how a drug first is described, right? Any drug, you have in vitro models, you have animal models, and then you show safety and so mechanistic insights. But with trials also out there, doctors can adventure and understand more. I mean, the physicians, there is physicians that they are very innovative on it, but there are others that are very old school. They say, no, don't try that. It's not gonna work. You're gonna waste your time. You're gonna waste your money. Not having a condition like, for example, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, it's just to read a little bit about and then see that there is a better life expectancy and best life quality to these kids. And some of them just take your corticosteroid. Good luck. It's gonna be fine. Just pray. I can't understand that. It's just based on the success rate. Use it, offer it, and that's something that I think we need to push more. So different generations of doctors, they get more informed and accepting the treatment.
But if there is such a strong evidence, for example, for Duchenne, why aren't like any phase 4 clinical trials going on about it? Because if it's so clearly beneficial, shouldn't someone have funded something like that?
There are trials. The thing in the United States is that it is a rare disease. It's an orphan disease. So there's also the business side of it. You will make a drug, you will trial a drug that will cost the trial $8 million for a disease that is only occurs in boys, and the prevalence is what, 1 in 5,000? That's something that also they evaluate. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that if you develop a drug, if you use a stem cell line, that stem cell, in the case of mesenchymal stem cell, it's have self-renewal, so they divide, but it's not forever. So the bank of stem cells that you will have, it will be for so many people. It's basically, if you submit an IND for that line and it's done, you need to submit another IND for another line. It will be less time, but at least you need to show mechanism or of safety first. But it's another donor. It can be different because it's biologics. So that's another reason why it's being like that. But there's studies showing that the effect of treatments of Duchenne using mesenchymal stem cells, it does decrease fibrosis in the muscle. And there is some molecular insight that shows what's the mechanism behind this with stem cells and skeletal muscle that lacks of dystrophin.
What's most advanced in terms of research? For example, if I asked you, like, give me the strongest evidence for a disease treatable with stem cell treatments. For example, is there any meta-analysis of clinical trials on stem cell research? They're probably going to be all over the place. We're going to have from cases to cases series and cohorts. And is there anything on that edge of the spectrum, anything like meta-analysis or clinical trials that is ready or coming close to conclusion?
Well, first, osteoarthritis is already accepted. So it's all public now on the effect of the treatment of mesenchymal stem of osteoarthritis using mesenchymal stem cells. That's one. And second, multiple sclerosis is widely studied and widely tested. And I think that's the second one that is coming. using mesenchymal stem cells from umbilical cord. Heterologous treatment, allogeneic stem cells. Yeah, because it's the way that mesenchymal stem cells work. They're signaling cells. They're going to create homeostasis, most in a inflammatory condition or an autoimmunity, and this is the perfect match. So that's something that I encourage everyone to look.
That's a bit out of your specific area because I guess your clientele here is like perhaps 50% of Panamanians and 50% of foreigners, but the foreigners are more geared towards stem cell treatment and the Panamanians towards like the red light or the hyperbaric medicine. I imagine it's something like that.
Yeah, well, actually 90% are United States. Most of our patients
90% of patients overall.
United States, yes. Panama, not too many. One, because the whole country were 4 million. Some
Yes.
proportion.
It's a city.
Yeah.
São Paulo has 23 million inhabitants. It's 6 times larger than the country of Panama.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's more frequent to have patients in Panama that, for example, we have also an anti-aging clinic that they're more interested in longevity, hair loss, facials, treatment with peptides or laser. That they come more from that. We have several patients that also do the Regeneration Clinic of Panama, which are more complex clinical conditions that are treated there. But in proportion, United States go more for that, for all the clinical, like these complex conditions than the anti-aging, because they can do anti-aging in their countries easily.
No, that's surprising. I didn't expect to be 90%. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the reasons I decided to investigate healthcare here in Panama, of course, the primary reason is because I was coming here, but it is also because of the strength of medical tourism in Panama. I find it really interesting because, like you said, Anvisa, for example, in Brazil likes to block pretty much everything. It's a compliance nightmare. And so I really like competition, not only between companies, but also between countries. If our country is bad at regulating some medical intervention, you can go have that medical intervention elsewhere. I think that's interesting. And so this is a bit out of our scope because you are dealing with expats or people who come here specifically for medical tourism. This is definitely not the public we're going for. But is there anywhere in the world where insurance companies are covering stem cell treatments?
Good question. United States don't do it. They don't do it. Mexico neither. To be completely honest, that part of the insurance, in Panama neither. They don't cover. I think it also has to do with the price. It's one, yeah, I think that's primarily. In the United States, there's some the companies that they cover. For example, some apocytes that are made from amniotic membrane that it's accepted by the FDA for burns, for diabetic wound in the foot. And yes, it's covered. It's covered. But stem cell treatment, no. Must say no. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe other countries do it, but I don't know, to be honest.
And should we expect any upcoming changes, like in the scientific part, in the next, let's say, couple of years?
For us?
For treatments in a general way, is there something that has been developing a lot recently and are expected to make a breakthrough, for example, in 2026? I mean, let's talk like this. News in stem cell treatment. What news should we expect in 2026, 2027, if any?
Well, I can talk about us. I know there is things ongoing, but I need more data to kind of justify or explain. But for us, we are focusing in other cell types and have compound treatments with biologics. Not only mesenchymal stem cells, exosomes, or secretomes derived from mesenchymal stem cells, but also other cell types. Understanding the mechanism per se, the cell, and also the effect of combining stem cells with other products. So that's a cellular new cell lines, and also tissue-derived products. Like the tissue that I mentioned to you before, the apocytes, that's one, but manufactured in a different way. We're going to develop a different version, not only the embryonic membrane, but also from the umbilical cord and other compounds, cells that are derived from the umbilical cord blood that we're going to be using for our treatments. So far, that's what I can talk about. There is more, but I need to make sure that everything is good with my research lab. And but yeah, you will see more. We have a long list of projects that we want to run.
And coming to a close, kind of, I talked about Dr. Javier as well, about like measuring the outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have like studies on the patients you have? I mean, you have case series.
Yes.
How are those progressing? Are you expected to deliver any major results? How long do you expect? How much time do you need? Let's say in 10 years, you will have like a control case or something like that.
Less than that. I think it will be, we'll say a year and a half. We'll have a very, very good understanding of the. I mean, we can tell even in 3 months the changes, but sustained effect. That's something that I want to understand. If there is a repair or it delays progression of a disease, or it's sustained the improvement, and for how long. We have cases in which we know the success rate. We do measurements. We have questionnaire. We have a team that is specialized on getting the post-treatment follow-ups, and that's something that we also match with the line that we use in the laboratory. And that's so we can also improve our manufacturing and select lines that are more potent.
Well, anything you would like to add I haven't asked about, you think it's important or useful or interesting?
Well, I think if a message for all the doctors is that I live this. I've seen people getting better. Personally, I also have family that they have rare diseases like ALS, and I have an uncle that he's been alive for 10 years living with the disease, and thanks to stem cells, it's been prolonged his life and his quality of life. But that's one thing, to open and read and understand more about it, but also understand where the stem cells come from and where they are manufactured, and safety, certificate of analysis. Ask all the questions you need to ask to make sure that your patient is going to be safe. So that's the last thing I want to share. Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me. After all, I am at your home, not the other way around.
My pleasure. Prazer.
And for explaining and showing. And Jalvich, I know this does not depend on you. I very much look forward to like the first non-inferiority clinical trial comparing stem cells, mesenchymal stem cells, with some other intervention that's not placebo.
Of course.
I very much look forward to some non-inferiority study someday in the future.
Of course.
Whoever does it will need financing, but I am eager to see what will come of it.
Of course. Of course, you will.
Thank you for having me and for explaining it to me.
My pleasure.
Gracias.
De nada.
Yes. Because usually we ask patients not to report, but in your case, we can give you a sneak peek. Yeah. This is right now we're finishing the batches of the stem cells,
And I speak here, and the case was first outside. Buenos dias, less than usually. Garcia, this question, it was still how is there overstated for us to do today in around 2000 family. If you consider it's No, I know we're on fire. More so. I hear. Thank you for work and give my just like this. I don't know. They're really close minutes. But I guess instead of good harder sick or pills are not any third times a day. They're more like separate with their own mental benefit. It's like this one goes and each the food is going to so empty. As your high they are.